First time live on YouTube in a long time. And I'm sorry that it doesn't look like I'm looking directly at you. Um, we have to get used to everything being new. So, welcome. And I am Liz Statlander. If you've never met me before, if you've never been to my channel before, welcome. I'm a marriage and family therapist and mental health counselor, and I specialize in grief. I've been podcasting probably a little over 6 or 7 years, and I've been on Facebook a lot. And I was always going live on Facebook. And today I decided to make the switch to YouTube. And I hope you guys enjoy it. YouTube is a great format because I do talk in depth and I do speak intellectually about psychological ideas like grief. And Facebook and Instagram are really becoming just really fast, just fast little clips, and you don't get to really get into the depth of something. So I'm hoping that today we can get deep into a topic that will be very helpful for you. And I'm assuming if you're here, you're probably grieving or you have recently lost somebody or you know someone, you're very close to somebody who's grieving, because today's topic is interesting. It's about survivor's guilt. And I started talking about this last week. Everybody really loved the topic. So I decided like we could jump into it a little bit more. When I'm talking about survivor's guilt, and I'm talking about why them and not me. Many people, when they lose someone, especially that's their age, it's one thing when you lose, let's say, a grandparent who was well into their 80s and or 90s, and they weren't going to live forever, and you're kind of prepared for it in some ways. So when it happens, we're not as completely shocked as we are when someone younger, our own age, or someone that we really consider a colleague or a comrade, when somebody dies young in our age group, it is very devastating. And amongst friends and siblings, I often hear the question is, why them and not me? Meaning, why did they get this horrible outcome and I'm still alive? Why them and not me? And when we talk about survivor's guilt, which goes beyond why them, not me, it also goes into this big guilty feeling of if I move on and I start healing, or if I start smiling, or I start dancing, or I start living life again, then I feel guilty because they're not here to enjoy it and I'm abandoning them. So, with abandonment feelings and guilt, survivor's guilt, why them, not me, we have to understand that underneath all of that is one simple premise that I want to change today for you. I want to change your minds. And underneath that, it is basically death is bad. It's the most horrible thing that could ever happen to somebody, and nothing could be worse. Now, I'm going to correct that a little bit to say death is horrible for those of us left behind because we miss them, we grieve them, we're traumatized by losses. We are left with all these, probably, I would say, grief is the most painful emotion that we have. And so we grieve when we lose someone to death, even divorce. But if we stop for a second and think, okay, so we feel bad because we're all left here on earth without this person that brought so much for our life. But how do we know for sure, for certain, that death is awful and bad for that person? And the reality is, we don't. No matter what your belief systems are, whether you believe in life after death, which I do, or you don't, we really don't know what happens. And so those of us who are left grieving often think, where are they? Are they okay? Can I have a sign? And people who think a little bit more positively about death tend to have a much smoother grieving process. Grieving's never easy and it's not a fun process and it's not easy. But if you believe in life after death, then obviously dealing with grief is a little bit smoother because you're not worried that the loved one is in danger or that something's bad happening to them. But what we might think is they got robbed, right? My parents both died very young. And I used to think how unfair because they got robbed of life, of all these years seeing me and my siblings growing and grandchildren and nieces and nephews and all the joy. They didn't get that. They've missed that. But as I've gotten older and I've been specializing in grief for a long time, I've come to understand that we can change that feeling if we change the basic premise about death. And I know this sounds a little rebellious to some people, and I'm not taking anyone's grief away or anyone's pain away. I'm just simply saying that if we shift our perspective just a little bit and maybe entertain the idea that, hey, maybe where they are, where they go when people go and they die is beautiful and fun and they're feeling no pain and they can still see us and they can still enjoy us, then the grieving process just feels a little bit better because then we can focus more on our pain and our loss more so than, oh my God, where's this person? And I can even remember as a little girl when I was 11, my father died. And one of my fears was, where is he? How do you explain to a little girl where her father is? This is difficult work. And because I've been through this in my personal life and not just reading it out of textbooks, I've learned how to really speak to all these big questions in grief. So if we can switch that basic premise that even just even if you're the biggest skeptic, if you just say to yourself, okay, we don't know that death is necessarily bad for the person who died. We don't know that. We've been taught to believe that. We've been taught to believe that life is the most precious thing. Our bodies are wired to survive, survive, survive. And when somebody dies, we look at it as a horrible, awful thing. So if you think about what's one of the first things you'll say to somebody if you hear someone died, you'll say, I'm so sorry. People say, I'm so sorry. Oh, that's terrible. Oh my God, if you need anything, call me, right? Because all of these ideas when somebody dies are based on death being completely horrible, the worst thing that can happen. But as we move forward in society, I see a shift happening. And that shift is that we can start to see death in a different light. And instead of focusing on the horrible parts of it and the anger, which is, by the way, perfectly normal, we can start thinking about it in a way that, okay, the grief and the pain I'm feeling right now is my emotions. It's my feelings. And I'm not going to project that onto the person who died because you know what? We don't really know. Maybe they're doing great. Maybe they're enjoying themselves. Maybe who knows? And reality is, no one wants to say this out loud, but we don't know. We really don't know. So we don't like talking about death sometimes because it's so uncertain. And human beings like answers and they like certainty. But if we can just kind of go with the basic premise that maybe death isn't so bad, and I'm going to separate my feelings of grief from gloom and doom for that person and feeling so sad about what they missed and that they got cut short in their life and stay focused on the actual loss that we feel, you've started to cut the heaviness of your grief in half. And this isn't necessarily something we do overnight. It's everything in grief is a journey and it's a process. And when we understand this, we can relax. We can tell our nervous system to just calm down for a moment because when we are grieving, our nervous system is hijacked. It's constantly looping of over how will I make it with this person? Oh my God, I'm never going to see this person again. I mean, some really heavy things. And we think about why them, not me? Could this have happened to me? How did I survive and they didn't? I mean, the looping thoughts that happen during grief are many. I just had a client of mine the other day whose father died suddenly. And this was very, this was her best friend. And her best friend died and what unexpectedly. So I've been working with her over the past few days. And right now she's in complete and total shock because our brain cannot even process something that deep. We can't even begin to understand the huge finality of losing someone that we're that close to. So I always like to slow people down in the grieving process because again, when we're shocked, when we're when we've lost our best friends or our brother or sister, God forbid, our child, anybody, the mind just starts looping and looping and looping, and there's a lot of anxiety. So when we know that we can take some steps when grieving, no matter what stage, whether it's early or late, and we can start to understand the grieving, the death itself, as not necessarily something so bad. So I'm going to tear apart this for you a little bit because I think it'll be helpful. And this is information that you might get in a lecture or series. It's not necessarily normal grief therapy, but I'm going to throw it out there because I think it'll be helpful. The only reason that we really think death is so awful is because we've been conditioned to believe that. Now, I'm not taking anyone's grief and pain away from them because I've felt it. I do feel it. I understand grief quite well. But if we were told from the beginning of life that death is a part of life, that when somebody dies, we really celebrate and honor what they brought to our lives, what they brought to our communities, what they brought to our families at large. We celebrate because we know they're going somewhere that's going to be incredible and beautiful. If we were told that from the beginning of life, can you imagine how different we would think about grief? We probably wouldn't even have survivor's guilt at all. And we would have no problem whatsoever with laughing, with laughing or having joy in our lives while grieving. But most of our traditional grieving processes tell us wear black, be sad, mourn your loss, and don't do anything disrespectful to the dead, right? So, as a Jewish person, we have, when my father died, we had to cover all the mirrors in the house because you're not supposed to think about, what I was told is you're not supposed to think about vanity. You're only supposed to think about the person who died. Now, think about that message that that sends to an 11-year-old whose father just died. Like, what? We weren't allowed to play video games. We weren't allowed to do anything joyful. The TVs were covered. And this is part of an old tradition in Judaism. And many other cultures have similar mourning processes where the focus is really on sadness. And because this is so common in the Western world, we just agreed to this, and pretty much everyone in America looks at death through that type of lens, pretty much. Like even the classic old, Italian widow that you see. I don't know if you've ever been to Italy or that we just know the archetype like of a woman dressed in all black and, wore black for years and never remarried. And, women, if they would get remarried back in the 1800s or early 1900s, that was kind of scandalous, kind of risque. So think how far we've come in looking at grief and understanding grief. But We also have a long way to go because the cultural conditioning, the way we've been taught to think about death and the way people speak about death is still pretty negative. It's getting better, but it's still negative. For example, when my mother died, which was only 13 years ago, instead of covering mirrors and covering televisions, and by the way, if this is what you do, I completely respect and honor it. But for me, it didn't work so much. So when my mother died, we did 2 days of Shiva, which is 2 days of where everyone comes to the house and the community's supposed to gather around you. But my brother and I had to supply all the food and things and drinks, and people come over, they come over to pray. And instead of 7 days and 7 nights, which was very intense, which we did in 1987, in 2013, we did it our way, a way that we felt more comfortable with. And that would have been really looked down upon in the 80s or even in the 90s. But in 2013, it was accepted. And people are, cutting the grieving processes shorter. They're doing different things. They're having more celebratory events for that person. So I think slowly we're moving away from the traditional ways of looking at death, which I can't say strongly enough. Whatever works for you, you should do it. But I really want to convince everybody watching to some degree that death is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. It might be something that gives us the most horrible feeling, which is grief and loss and that emptiness and that longing for that person. But the death in itself is very natural, a part of life, something that we're all eventually going to experience, and that it's not scary for the person. We get very caught up in that. I've been caught up in it. My clients who are early in the grieving process will, so much of their pain is wondering if was my loved one in pain when they died. W- do they know that they're not with us anymore? Are they sad? Are they scared? Are they in pain? We go through all of these thoughts, and where are they? Is there life after death? All of these big existential questions come up when somebody dies. And because we can't really answer these questions, we start looping and overthinking and getting anxious and then getting depressed because nobody really, with any degree of certainty, can say, "Oh, Elizabeth, your mom's doing well. Here's where she is. This is great." No one can really do that. I do believe that there are a few talented people out there that do have the ability to act as a medium between the afterlife and this life. And I do believe that they just go on to a different realm. But my beliefs about death, life after death, are not necessarily going to be any of all of your ideas. And I don't want to go too far off on what I believe. So I want to stick with what people watching this might believe, which might be they don't know. Most people really don't know. Some people suspect there's something, but they don't really know what or how it works. And this starts to cause this nervousness for the person who's grieving about, oh my God, where are they? Are they okay? What if they want to talk to me? What if they need something? I'm not going to be there for them, especially if you've lost a child or a pet, right? Something that we care for, that we're responsible to, that we nurture, and that grows in our love. When they die, it's horrible because not only is it part of our hearts, but we worry about them. So, what if we were to shift the belief system that we've all been raised in for, uh, I mean, this is probably going on beyond thousands of years, but at least in our lifetime, that dying is painful and dark and scary and awful. What if we just allow ourselves the space to say, well, maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it is very peaceful. And maybe I can live with the uncertainty and I can trust and I can keep my grief to myself, meaning not quiet to yourself, but I can stay with my own feelings rather than catastrophizing the feelings of the person who died. Wouldn't that change things? So, if we change the whole entire premise that death is not necessarily bad, but death is a painless part of life, and that what's beyond life is just another realm or even something we just can't see or know yet, but it's something. And then we can cut that cord to all of the catastrophic thinking, the guilt, the feeling that they got cheated, the feeling that they got robbed of life, that were angry because they lost their life too early. Just imagine what that would feel like if we could truly have faith in that and even have faith in that without answers. And that takes a lot of, I guess, inner confidence to be able to say, maybe afterlife is nothing, maybe it's something, but either way, I understand that my grief belongs to me and for those of us who survived, and that I've got to let myself go through all the emotions and trust that that other person is okay. This is one of the hardest things to do in grief. If I could tell you how many people I sit across from in a day or in my lifetime where so much of the focus has been on the person who died and worrying and feeling so bad, um, it would be in the tens of thousands, literally. That's such a big part of the grieving process. So, although we can't be guaranteed or necessarily know for sure, especially I'm talking to the skeptics out there because everyone's welcome here, then we can live with that uncertainty and we can just say, okay, I'm not certain, but I believe that they're well. I believe that they're well. I believe that this life is basically good, and I believe that they are well. And therefore, I'm not going to see this as the worst thing that could happen to them. I'm going to see this as the worst thing or one of the worst things that's happened to me. And this is my challenge. And this is my opportunity for growth and for healing. And if we don't make meaning of the loss, we will be in anger for the rest of our lives. And I think part of the grieving process consists of going through this a kind of merry-go-rounds of emotions. They go rounds and rounds, and it's anger and it's sadness and it's pain and it's a longing. But if we can change our basic premise and our conditioning about death being so scary and awful, we can really make the grieving process a little less scary. And I do challenge my clients because I think it's helpful. I do challenge my clients who are grieving to investigate life after death. Why not? Right? Because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of conversations happening. There's a lot that science is doing right now to look into this. And if you research, you're going to find a lot of interesting information, especially if you watch interviews with people who claim to have had a near death experience. And when you watch enough of those, like I have, you start to see the patterns. And it gets you thinking, okay, wow, my loved one is probably doing just fine or better than fine. But now I have to figure out how to go on without them. And isn't it easier? to be able to go on without them, knowing that they're safe and they're loved and that there really is no there is no death. There might be a physical death, but that the soul is not finite. If you're totally skeptical and you think it's complete BS, I honor and welcome you. And we would go from a different viewpoint. If you're my client, I would never push that. But even to learn to live with uncertainty is part of the grieving process because we can't answer questions indefinitely. And because we don't have all these answers indefinitely around the death of somebody, it weighs on us. And when you start to pull this apart, I even talked about this last week in Survivors, when we were talking about survivor's guilt then, is I want everybody to do this little exercise for yourself today or tonight or tomorrow, somewhere, sometime soon. And just take a blank sheet of paper and I want you to write down one question. What does my own religious and or ethnic culture teach me about death? So look at your practices. So again, if we're going with the Jewish, what is the Jewish viewpoint? And I'm not a rabbi, but from what I know, the Jewish viewpoint is we have to face death. We go back to God the way we came, right? So we don't we bury very quickly. We keep a closed casket in today's day and age. We wear a ribbon. If we're an immediate family member, we wear a black ribbon, which the rabbi tears to show the community that we're mourning. So, right there, a black torn ribbon that to show people, I'm grieving so that people treat us kindly and know that we might need extra support. It's a fascinating idea. It's a beautiful idea in theory, but it's still associating death with darkness and the color black, which is colorless really. And think about a skull and crossbones, coffins, right? All of these things are used to make us scared, right? We associate those with haunted houses and dark television and vampires and ghosts and goblins and death and scary, and it's been imprinted in us and then reinforced and reinforced and reinforced by all of our Western culture, so that even the mere word of death or funeral home has a feeling to it, right? People who actually are funeral directors and own funeral homes, they're interesting people to talk to because they typically do very well financially. And they've told me that they kind of have to hide and be very careful what they do in the community and what car they drive and what they wear, because there's sort of this stigma on somebody making money. Okay, again, I do not believe this, off of the dead people or people dying. But how about this? How about remember that thank God these services are there when we need them. And if you've ever lost someone and you had to make the funeral arrangements and you had to do all of this, you're so thankful to funeral directors and funeral homes and these services that in itself, just using them can be traumatizing. And because we just believe and we've been conditioned to believe all these horrible negative things about death, it really colors the way that we view grief. So, if there's one message I hope to get across to you, is that death in itself does not have to be associated with all this horror and darkness, because for all intents and purposes, it really isn't. That stems from our pain and our grief, which individually for each person, of course, that's real. But That's a long, arduous process in which I'm here to help you through, and your family will help you through, hopefully. And we learn and we grow and we go through a lot of different stages of grief, right? It's not very happy in the beginning. It's shock, which leads to anger. And then eventually we accept that, okay, now my job is to figure out how to build a life without this person and not feel guilty about it and not feel like I'm abandoning them if I start to heal or I start to laugh and smile and dance again, and know that the person who died, the person that loved me, that I loved so much, would never want to wish horrible bad things on me, no matter what your culture says. They would want you to live life to the fullest, to be able to laugh and smile and find joy in every single day. Imagine how heart-wrenching it would be for somebody, the person who died, that loves you, watching you in your grief. They would want to be there for you and hold you and support you and encourage you to smile again and to find joy in each day. And I believe that we can have moments of joy within the grieving process, but we just have to know that we have permission, because society and culture tells us quite the opposite. So I want you guys to think a little bit differently after you watch this. I want you to watch after this and be, well, I don't know. I think Elizabeth's a little crazy or she's too outside of the box. Good. Think that, because this is how we learn and grow and evolve. And you can think, I think Elizabeth's crazy. Grief is horrible. Death is horrible. Grief is horrible. I'll give you that. Death, I'm not so sure. I think it's only really horrible for those of us that are left behind. That's my personal belief. But even if you're a skeptic and you don't believe that, the uncertainty of, well, I really don't know, so I'm not going to jump to any conclusions about this, but instead I'm going to learn how to move forward in the uncertainty and find joy in moments. I'll give you an example, which I gave last week on my Facebook Live. So I don't know, for those of you may or may not know, I can't see, somebody's writing something. What are you writing on here? That's very nice. Okay. So if I could block you, I'm going to block you. So there's no reason to come here and cause problems. So goodbye. Anyway, a story that I had to tell people was I lost one of my best friends from AML leukemia a few years ago. And I'm also a pro amateur dancer. So when he died, I stopped dancing for a couple weeks. But he, my friend Peter, who died, loved coming to my dance recitals, loved watching my dance videos, was my biggest cheerleader in my pro am ballroom dancing. But when he died, I just thought it was disrespectful if I continued dancing, at least for a little while. So you can see culture, tugging on me. So my dance coach called. He said, "Hey, Elizabeth, are you coming in?" And I said, "No, I don't think I'm going to come in for a little while. I'm feeling a little bit anxious after Peter dying, and I'm not sure what I should do." And he said to me, thank God, he said, "Elizabeth, I think you should come in. I think it will help you." And something just kind of resonated when he said that. And I thought about Peter and I thought about how much I love dancing. And I know that Peter was a joyful person, somebody who really lived for the beauty of each moment. And he would never want me to not dance because he died. He would never want that. So I said to Stefan, my dance coach, I said, you know what? I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to see if I can handle it. So, despite my anxiety that we all get after grief, we're kind of shell shocked. I went to the studio and I danced. And I'm so glad that I went in because not only was it helpful, I think dancing helped me recover from that loss. It gave me joy. It gave me a sense of life, even in the midst of something very sad. And I came to learn that many women who were dancing at the ballroom studio had gone through great losses, had lost their husbands and children. And it was interesting that there were so many grieving people that gravitated towards ballroom dancing. It was so interesting. And in ballroom dancing, we find a family, not just, you know, a dance lesson. So that's what worked for me. And that was me challenging myself out of my cultural beliefs, which in Judaism are you don't dance, you don't go to entertainment, you're not supposed to really have fun. At least that's what I was told when somebody dies. So me dancing was really like, you know, breaking what I my conditioning. And I thought, why should I sit around and be miserable every day because I loved and lost my best friend? Does that make sense? Does it make sense? But it makes sense if you're conditioned and brought up that way. So tonight, when you have a minute, you can replay this and just write down on a piece of paper, what are my beliefs about death? What have I been taught to believe is true about death? And what could I change in my belief system? And if you have things like I do and your cultural conditioning that death is bad, dark, ugly, death that is disrespectful to smile when somebody's has died that you love. Um, if you believe those things, I'm going to challenge that. And I want you to challenge yourself because death and grief is hard enough. To cut ourselves off from laughter, joy, the beauty of life during grieving makes it so much harder. So much harder. And I think it's probably all for nothing. Think about it. So, if you would like to work with me and you're looking for grief therapy, I do specialize in grief and I do a lot of intensive therapy. So, set 4 to 12 week programs privately, just between me and the client. And we design the program specifically for you. I work with a lot of grieving people and a lot of other forms of loss and rebuilding and reconstructing our lives after loss, which is really a beautiful time. And it's so easy to work with me. All you have to do is either click on my bio and send me a message through my website, or my phone number is actually on the sessions page of my website. And you can send me a text message and just say, hey, Elizabeth, this is so and so, and I would like to start some grief therapy. So it's that simple. Working with me is so easy. And please share this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. It means a lot to me. I'm trying to expand my viewership, and I really, really do appreciate it. So thank you. Um, Please share this video with anyone that you love who may be grieving or knowing someone who's grieving or is experiencing loss right now. This will be so helpful to them. And make sure that you save it so you can rewatch it for yourself. And again, working with me is so easy. All it takes is a quick message. There's not a million forms and things you have to do to set up therapy with me. It's simple. So I thank you again for showing up today. I will see you next Monday at 3 p.m. There's my little Roxy. She says hello to you too. And thank you. I look forward to seeing you next Monday. And by the way, follow me on social media because I have content coming out every single day. Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.